In the first part of this presentation, I talked about how children learn the pronunciation of their mother tongue. In this second part, I'll look at some implications for how we teach speech sounds to older learners who are students of a second language. We need to be aware, of course, that young children and older learners come to the task of learning the pronunciation of a new language with very different strengths and weaknesses. Infants are good at creating perceptual categories out of new sensory data that they encounter. They're also good at motor experimentation. Those aspects of speech development are undoubtedly a challenge for them, but they're similar to other challenges that infants master. The interest for us has been how infants link the perceptual and production domains, how they solve the correspondence problem for speech sounds. Older learners come to their task understanding already that there will be a correspondence between what they hear and say, and teachers usually use a label of some kind, an IPA symbol for example, to mediate between the two representations. This is indicated by the rectangle in the diagram. However, older learners are in the grip of their first language, unable to hear new sounds in L2, and finding it difficult to move out of the highly practiced motor routines that they have for producing speech. Given these contrasting starting points, we can expect that there will be some differences in the way that infants and older learners learn to pronounce a new language. That said, all learners of the pronunciation of a new language need to develop a path from the left of this diagram to the right of it. Let's remind ourselves of two possible learning paths for an infant, and then we'll look at the possibilities for older learners. The conventional assumption is that infants solve the correspondence problem for speech sounds by themselves, using their own judgment of similarity. The basic process is one of auditory matching to target. As shown in the diagram, they are believed to form a perceptual category for a speech sound first, and then to use this to guide their production of the speech sound. The two processes might happen together, or with a time delay between them. The alternative paradigm is one that relies on the mirroring of an infant's output by a caregiver within the many games of vocal imitation that occur between them in early childhood. This process starts with babbling, motor experimentation on the part of the infant. A social partner, a caregiver in this case, then plays a crucial role. She has well-established criteria for perceiving L1 speech sounds, and using these, she interprets the infant's output within L1. She reflects a well-formed L1 speech sound back to him as her imitative but reformulated response to his utterance. She thus provides him with a linguistic evaluation of his output, and as described earlier, this gives him the solution to the correspondence problem for speech sounds, either by deduction or by simple association. A second language learner also faces the challenge of moving from the left to the right of this diagram, and there are two possible pathways for him as well. Across the top of this diagram, I'll show the sensory or listen first possibilities, and across the bottom, the motor first one. Teachers who work within the imitative intuitive approach believe that learners will come to hear and produce the differences between speech sounds through cycles of hearing a model and immediately copying it. This is commonly called listen and repeat. The learner is supposed to be able to move from the left to the right hand of the side of the diagram directly. But the poor results most people get with this approach led to it being refined into the so-called analytic linguistic approach. As Piers Messum and her colleagues describe it, the analytic linguistic approach to teaching the pronunciation of speech sounds utilizes information and tools to supplement listening, imitation, and production. The different aspects of learning speech sounds are addressed individually as well as together. It's considered that the learner's first step is to develop a new perceptual category for the new speech sound. Then, for production, articulatory information is provided. Together, these allow the student to develop a more considered activity of saying in response to hearing the model that he is still, of course, expected to copy. Of the two main elements, perception gets more attention than production because it's imagined that once a student can hear a sound well, copying it is, in some sense, natural. Auditory matching will do its work as soon as the student can hear what he needs to copy. But in practice, there are problems. Perceptual development can take special, intensive techniques to achieve. Improved production is not then automatic. Even when students' perception of a sound has improved, not all students escape the grip of their L1 articulation. So while learning to pronounce speech sounds using this pathway does work for some students, it works for relatively few of them. Within second language learning, as with first language learning, the alternative paradigm also starts with Gattegno's ideas. Having questioned whether infants learn to pronounce by imitation, he went on to develop an approach for teaching L2 pronunciation that treats it firmly as a motor skill rather than as an exercise in auditory matching. His methodology for teaching pronunciation was what led him to name his language learning approach the silent way, and it has been used by silent way teachers for over 50 years. It's an articulatory approach. The order of events is not listen and repeat or listen and say, but say and then listen to what you have produced. In the first step, the social partner, now a teacher, induces motor experimentation on the part of the student. To do this, Gattegno realized that the teacher should remain silent, not modeling the sound for the class. As soon as the teacher provides a model, students will try to copy it, and their presence, their attention, will move from their articulators into their ears. They'll lose contact with what they are doing, careful, considered experimentation, and will fall back into an automatic copying process dominated by L1. A silent way teacher is not an inactive teacher though, and she's not necessarily mute. Being silent in this context means that she doesn't model sounds, but she may well speak. She acts like a sports coach, evaluating the student's production, giving him ideas for improvement, and encouraging further work. A sports coach doesn't have to perform the movement needed by the athlete. She doesn't have to say the sound, but she does have to understand it and the results that are needed. In the language class, the teacher has criteria for how any given speech sound should sound when spoken in a particular student's voice. She can therefore give feedback that is individualized and precise. This coaching improves the student's production, but also his perception of the new sounds. Because he's consciously and knowingly doing something different with his articulators, he expects to hear something different being produced. This genuine expectation of novelty is the attentional set he needs for his listening, for him to be able to put aside his L1 phonological sieve. And he's also hearing the many attempts that everyone else in the class is making, and observing his teacher's evaluation of their attempts as acceptable, unacceptable, passable, excellent, and so on. In a sense, the class becomes an even richer environment for perceptual learning than those we create using, for example, high variability phonetic training or similar methods. In this teaching paradigm, then, both the motor and sensory sides of the speech-sound problem are addressed simultaneously. Let's summarize the two parts of this presentation. What emerged from the first part was that auditory matching to target may not be the natural learning mechanism by which infants learn to produce speech sounds. Our teaching practices in L2 have always assumed that it is natural, but that might have been a mistake. The alternative paradigm for children, mirrored equivalence, gives a role to the games of vocal imitation between children and their caregivers that are such a striking feature of development. And this paradigm is better supported by the current evidence. For second language learning, we know that simple listen and repeat doesn't work, and the more sophisticated developments from this, perceptual training followed by auditory matching to target, are difficult to implement and still unsuccessful for many L2 students. The alternative paradigm, the articulatory approach that Caleb Gattegno pioneered with the silent way, has been developed and proven over the last 50 years and is very popular with students. My final thought then is this. We know that the teaching of the production of speech sounds is hard and in general rather unsuccessful. To improve this, perhaps we shouldn't be doing more of what we already do. Instead, the way forward may be to change the pedagogical paradigm. Away from developing listening first and then trying to match a target, to a coaching paradigm where pronunciation is treated first and foremost as a motor skill, undertaken with the assistance of a social partner, as may well be the case with young children.